Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the third episode of our Evercam webinar. I'm here today with Mark Paulton. Mark's working with South32, and he's going to give a quick bio of himself, and then I suppose we're just going to jump straight in and go through this real-world look at site visibility with himself. Hello, Mark.
Hi. How are you doing?
Good.
Thanks for that. Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the introduction. Maybe the first question I ask: how do you pronounce, for the audience as well? How do you pronounce your name? Is it spelled E-O-I-N?
Yeah, get that a lot. When I'm abroad, it's Eowyn, but it's actually Owen, like something that belongs to you.
Owen. Yes.
So,
but it could be Ian. It's Owen.
Yeah,
yes.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, thanks. No, I'm Mark. It's pretty easy.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I've worked at South32. I've been in Australia for over 15 years now in a number of industries, predominantly in mining in the last 10, but oil and gas prior to that. And prior to that was in telecommunications as well. So I suppose technologies and the products that we're talking about today and utilizing real-world technology to help us integrate and deliver better construction projects is something that reminisced from my background and history of where I've been. So that was my background, and I know Europe pretty well. I was educated in London and University of London as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we started talking, the thing that first kind of grabbed my attention was you spoke about your early days of working with BBC, and just kind of that graph of technology is what really interested me, and kind of I presume is what you've carried on in your many of your roles going forward.
Yeah, I've always found it to be a real enabler, and in my first job, I think I was just out of university, so actually was part of my university program, was working at the BBC, and it was in their what they call special facilities department, which sounds like a very odd place to work, but it was where they had cameras that would be put in obscure places. So installed inside cricket stumps, inside handbags, inside motor vehicles, inside racing cars, on cameras of horses, on your jockeys, mostly sport related because that was what was driving it. But also in Top Gear. All those types of shows that we all know and love. The BBC pioneered a lot of the technology by really stripping down cameras to fit what the technology was and retrofit it into something that they could do rather than just developing a new camera from scratch. They applied the technology to an environment that they wanted to use, and I thought there was quite a good analogies to what we do with some of the technology we do on our NAS that developed, and how we can use that going forwards is some of the information that gets presented in the same thing. Can we put something in a work site that can give us a different perspective on things around not just for construction, but in safety, environmental quality, all those aspects that drive construction projects particularly.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It reminds me of my first days in Evercam, walking down to our basement, and we just a whole host of cables, cameras, everything stripped apart, and to your point, putting it back together in a way that kind of suits us with what we had available to us at the time. We've come on a lot then. It's quite a developed system since, but yeah, very, very similar.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'd love you to, we're here to talk about just site visibility, and I was wondering, could you just walk me through how your projects operated before you decided to implement site visibility, and kind of what was the decision on why you brought it onto sites for yourselves?
Yeah, so that's I suppose particularly in Australia, but it's not the most pioneering location. Sorry, I'll rephrase that. It's a very pioneering location because it's difficult to work in the environment. Yeah. It just means that when you do work there, you're having to rely on very traditional methods to make sure things are operating properly and are stable. Introducing variability into a work site that is predominantly difficult to be at due to environmental or logistical arrangements causes a lot of problems down the track. So most of the work in Australia, compared to say Europe or the United States, where those types of, I suppose, well-connected cities, well-connected jurisdictions are easier to adapt to apply new technology or new systems or new ways of working. So prior to this, we were very, this is the tried and true and tested method, which may seem archaic to a lot of other people who look in from outside and go, oh, you should be deploying something really good, and we can apply a new technology, or we can apply a new process. But because it's new and pioneering, untested, in construction projects, it adds a lot of risk. And
absolutely,
risk is not something we tend to like, either as a contractor or as a principal, as an owner. It's sort of like, no, just get this thing done in the least possible pain that I can possibly do. And how do we do that? So before we had any view of applying any real technology, and I'm talking about everything from basic GPS types of arrangements, it was all pen and paper based. There's a lot of processing of forms manually. You're lucky to have a laptop on site. It would be eventually things got scanned in and then got translated across by an administrator or something like that. And this was not long ago. Okay, it wasn't long ago. We were still doing this, and probably some element that still gets done as well in some jurisdictions, but progressively there's more technology being applied in the field. And one of the, I suppose, aspects was around how do we, get a different perspective of what's happening at site to what we normally would see from the ground or from the personnel who are involved in it from a day-to-day point of view. And we were approached by a gentleman called Alan Cook, who was a fantastic person to discuss solutions with us, and took us through what Evercam could do and what the process was and how you applied it, with using really simplistic terms of here's something that can be deployed into your site and give you that type of solution, or at least a different way of thinking about it, and try it out. And it wasn't, it's something that's not going to break the bank in the grand scheme of things from a construction project. It's a very small thing to actually consider in the mix. So it was easy to try for sure.
And presumably you touched on it there, that idea of just kind of rolling it out bit by bit kind of suited you guys, and presumably in mining and oil and gas, there's some systems you have to get through. It's probably more difficult to get a camera on site than it is, say, maybe in an industrial estate just outside of the city. Kind of what does that look like for you? What hurdles do you come across when implementing something like that, a new system on those kind of sites?
Absolutely, yeah. So again, I think we went through quite a bit of compliance checking with yourself. Predominantly, and a lot of people will appreciate this in larger corporates and organizations, cybersecurity is a risk to be investigated and to look at. And I suppose the benefit that we really saw of the way of deploying this sort of thing was it's very much a standalone item, and it was standalone in a number of things. It wasn't just standalone from a recording and camera and technology point of view, but it was standalone from a power, standalone from having to be integrated with anything else on site to hold it against a building or any of that sort of stuff. It was like, here's a self-contained unit and put it wherever you want, and it's going to just turn it on and it'll feed information to you as to sort of how you want it to be positioned. So we found that very attractive because it didn't require any significant amount of integration to any power system or into any communication system that was privately owned, which to say that would be also good, because then you can obviously control the data. But what we're not talking about is highly sensitive confidential data. It's just stuff that is pictures of a field or pictures of an area. You're not taking in-depth photos of people's faces, or it's very much a macro view. So the confidentiality is restricted to just the project information, which is not as critical as maybe something that you would want to retain in a private network. That's highly sensitive. So there's controls provided. There's enough security on the independent system. You can ensure that those back-end systems are secure and only accessible to those authorized, and can be stored off-site without too much worry from an IP point of view as well. So that was a really attractive benefit for us to say we don't have to go through a number of private requirements to ensure compatibility and integration, and that meant we could deploy this thing in a relatively quick period of time, and allow it to then really go wherever we want. And I suppose, for me, that was also a great way of being able to say to people, you don't need to, this is not going to be a massive impost on your own personal work. So remember that the people who work in construction, as I said to you, this is my tried and true and tested way. So when you're introducing a change or something else into their particular characteristics, you don't want to sort of say, I want you to do this instead, or I need you to do that instead. This is just something that's going to sit there independent, do its own thing, and you don't really need to worry about it until you actually do want to worry about it. So we were able to deploy it in a very discreet manner without too much disruption to existing operational crews, and they didn't have to change any of their work practices. And then we went into demonstrating its benefits and trialing it out.
And so, by the sounds of it, there is often this resistance, right, that to kind of new technologies, to things coming onto site. For your teams, kind of, it sounds like you gave a very low touch approach. Often within, especially within my department, we're all about onboarding, making sure that everyone has access, making sure everyone's been trained up on the platform, getting the most that they can. But that can be a bit overwhelming, right? If people aren't ready or don't want it, or don't know the benefit, I suppose, it can always feel like it's being kind of pushed down their necks. So I suppose, how did you manage that? Because it sounds like there's, I know there has been adoption with your team, but did you actively have to shift that, or how did that look like within your teams?
Partially, I think it was. It wasn't too dramatic. I mean, yes, there was an element of training, but to be frank, if you run any, I suppose, computer in some shape or form, the software that's required to open a camera and click here and zoom there and do something else, it's fairly intuitive. It's not it's not something you wouldn't necessarily come across when you're just doing the online banking, or you're doing something that you're actually preferring to do something else, or you're running YouTube, or you're running one of those other platforms. They are inherently following the same logic of how you work. So when you said, we need to get people trained to get maximum out of the system, for me, it was not necessary. It was just to say, this is how you log in, and this is the general basics of stuff. Most people just do that. The rest of stuff they'll either find out, or they'll get curious about and say, how do I do this? How do I do that? And then ask questions, and then they get more creative with, I need to get a time lapse of this, or I need to see that, or I need to do a particular extract of something over here. How do I do it? And that really avoids us having to present a resistance requirement to say, you must follow this training, you must do this, you must do that, which is generally a lot of ways of things being rolled out. And again, construction crews who this is a secondary item to them, don't need the distraction. I'd rather be curious, rather than to be curious about it and supplement their role, rather than trying to be something that they are required to undertake, like a new management system or something else that they're going to have to learn off the bat. It wasn't intended to be like that. And so from a reality point of view, it's to ensure that it's adding to their quality of their work, rather than adding to the complexity of their work.
No, great. And then I suppose you're always going to have those people who are resistant to it, right? We get it all the time about being watched on site, or their data privacy, and we're very intentional about kind of our purpose, right, for that project management purpose and for that time-lapse purpose. I suppose, did you have any kind of strong resistance to it? And kind of, did it, what was your arsenal against that, I suppose? Because I presume we come across it all the time, just for your own teams.
Sure. I mean, it's an interesting perception, because people, in a very closed sort of particular construction site where they think they've got an element of privacy or something like that, or they're in the middle of the bush somewhere and they go, there's no technology around here, and then all of a sudden there's something there. It makes people think and go, what's this? Isn't it? But then you try and remind them and say, well, you walk down, you go to a train station, or you get on the bus, or you go to a supermarket, or you go to the bank, or you just walk down the street in the high street. Mm-hmm. There is something surveilling you whether you know it or not. Now, those systems, ironically, are actually looking for people. That's the difference. They're actually looking for people, whereby this system and the way we would try and talk to them about if any concerns were raised, and we did get concerns raised about this, was, oh, I'm going to get recognized. I'm going to see this. I'm going to see that. And we say, no, this system is actually a construction management system. It's not a security or a surveillance system, which is completely different to what you get down the high street, but you don't seem to remember that. This is really looking at a macro environment of what's happening around the construction site, how things are moving, what things are doing. To some extent, you might be able to identify an individual. You know, that particular person's wearing purple socks that day, you might know it. But it's not immediately apparent that that person's got a scar on their face, or you've got some sort of very personal characteristic that may be with something they don't necessarily want identified about themselves. And it's not intended to do that. It's not really there to identify humans in the extent of what the color of their eyes, you know. So trying to then explain that to people, we did get some pushback, not just even our own people, but also our partners who we work with as well were asking the question, and rightfully so. But so I think part of the process was to give them an explanation, say why it's there, what's the purpose of this item, and then as it was being used, to ensure that they understood the benefits of what it was actually doing when something was useful to use the camera for. Which then more people were like, okay, well actually this is a better. This is better than what I thought. It wasn't just there for someone sitting in an ivory tower. This is actually benefiting us on the ground today. And that was something that we found as going, well, if we share this information with you, then you're able to use it for your own benefit. So to some extent, the wider you share the footage and the more users you have, the likelihood the adaptation is actually better rather than being it for a few discrete people within reason. Okay, but you know, my thinking is along those lines. You know, you can benefit the project immensely if more people are actually able to utilize it. So that's where, you know, if you can run that education process to explain to them what it can and can't do, its limitations, and what you can do, that allowed that curiosity to build. To say, well, actually, it's going to be beneficial for me to see how it sits, and it's not just surveilling me; it's actually surveilling the project, and how do I then adapt it into my work that I do every day. And so that's something that was quite apparent in terms of making that adaptation grow organically within the team.
And then kind of just around that, making it work for your day to day and for your team's day to day. Kind of presumably it wasn't the first project management software that you had on site. It wasn't the first reality capture that you had on site.
No, we had a typical time-lapse sort of aspects, but they're there for a completely different reason. They're just there to sort of demonstrate progress from 0 to 100%. This is a different product. It's not. It's much more detail around a day-to-day aspect of things you can actually look at, rather than just a very, very large lens. And then, so out of interest, how are your teams using it day-to-day now? So the best way I suppose I can look at it was that the way it gets used is slightly different for each particular group of people. So the benefits that we found of having something like this was allowing in the remote type of work that we do, so it's work that's further away than you can just pop down the road, for the support crews and support office staff, or whatever you want to call it, are able to actually feel connected with the project, even though they're providing a more sort of office-based role that's remotely providing support to the project. They can actually get tangible understanding and visual aspects of what they're working on. So they might be a cost controller, scheduler, which is a very technical job. There's in a computer all day, okay? but they can actually apply that to a picture, a visual thing they can actually update in there, see it on the screen reality wise, and go, this is what's actually happening on the ground. This is how my Gantt chart is actually developing in a specific real world aspect. So it gives them a really good way to connect to the project and say, is it doing it? And also allows them to feed back and go, well, I thought we were here on the progress chart. Meanwhile, I can only see it built to this height. So therefore, does it match up from what I'm seeing on the report? So it allows somebody independently over there to verify and maybe make contact with the site team and say something's not quite right, and I'm not seeing this particular number maybe that you've told me about progress. It's got an extra 0 on it, and I'm able to allow that to correct mistakes or ask questions independently. So that's the first aspect, I think, is the ability to be able to query it from people who not necessarily that detailed with the project 24/7. I suppose the second aspect that we found very useful was real-time, I suppose not monitoring, maybe is the wrong word, but retrospective aspects of somebody saying, I've got it on we might have it on a screen in the office where we are. So somebody's watching it and going, hold on a minute, something's happening in that corner of the picture, and I want to see a bit more about that. And they can ring somebody up and say, somebody's doing something over there. Can you just make sure it's all okay? Now that can be a disruptor, I must admit. So there's been some people saying, I've got somebody else chiming in and seagulling about a particular thing. So it is a sensitive thing.
Yeah,
so to make sure it's not the layman trying to do stuff. But that said, we have a culture in mining and oil and gas in particular as well of, if you see something, say something, and it's worth raising a concern if you do it. So that is an enabler to safety, that we do that, at least allow that voice to be heard. But I think on that aspect of it, it does allow us to then say there's something happening. Do we want to understand how it got to that situation, why that particular event is occurring? So something has happened. What was the build up to it? So you're able to then extract real time footage from the system, and in a relatively easy and efficient way of doing it, and to a quality level that is actually pretty good from a remote sort of aspect point of view. If you really want detail, you've obviously got to download it directly. But from the I suppose from an aspect of, can I get some real good information right now to help me inform me of what's been going on? Really good. And then you can also then say and see that and say, oh, look, there was a transgression here, or there was error here. Now that doesn't necessarily mean it results in a penalty. It just means that it's a way of helping educate the person who has made the transgression or the error to say, no, you're not allowed to do that. Remember, we're doing that. And remember, the reason why we're raising those problems are because we are explaining that's a risk that we're trying to mitigate. And we've told you the plan is not to do that. If you do continue to do that, then this risk realizes, and we can have a lot bigger problem to fix. So it's an educational conversation rather than I've seen you, I'm going to penalize you. Naughty,
so sort of we often have that kind of the query of like, what's it used for most, or what we call the aha moment. And it's not always a big terrible incident or something going wrong. Kind of to your point, it is that near misses, right? Being able to catch things, I think, before they happen. And presumably, before you had a camera on site all day every day, those things could get missed, right? And it's only then when something does happen, then you capture it, or then you realize it. Presumably, you touched on it as well, that seagulling, right? There is that fear that we used to do it only when the guys came to site, right? And these sites are fairly remote, that fly in, fly out, right? They'll seagull. And now there's that fear of kind of it happening all day, every day, right? But it sounds like there has been a shift, right? A shift in kind of mindset towards reality capture, be it within your teams. Do you see that happening on a wider scale, or do you think it's still very slow to happen? And I'm actually going to open this up to the audience. There's a poll here just about that shift in mindset. Have you seen it on your projects? But we can talk through as we're doing it.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Look, that's I definitely have. I think in the world generally, there's been a larger acceptance of this type of, I suppose, aspect of information being looked at and monitored and so forth. Like I said, the benefit of what this is it's not trying to look at your particular indiscretion or your particular work methodology, your particular way of doing stuff. It's looking at a macro level and saying, is this actually working at the project level? Is the progress being made to where we want it to be made? So there's and provided the detail is sufficiently away, and the camera is or in a position in a way that it's discreet and it's out the way, and it's not really, it's far enough away so people aren't concerned about it, but it's close enough to see the bigger scheme, then people are a lot more comfortable. If it's like as you're walking into the building and it's staring at you as you walk through and it's checking your eyelids, and then people go, yeah, I don't really want this. But when it's sitting on a pole 15 meters up in the air, 20 meters off the side of a road, and it's staring at a structure that's being built, everyone's like going, so what? It's not really doing anything. It's a very, very large span of field that it's looking at, which is ideal because you do want to capture the narrower the beam, the less you're going to see. Yes, you're going to get more detail, but the less you're going to see. And on a construction project, you want to see everything. You want to see what's happening at the top of the building as well as what's happening at the bottom, all at the same time, because they're all interlinked at the same time. So that's the key. And people feel, I think the mind shift for me is that they realize that this is not it's not something that's going to go away, but it also isn't something that's going to disrupt their particular day-to-day activity either. And in the end, if you sell it in a way that it's not there to penalize you, it's there to check and make sure we're educating everybody about why we are putting the controls in place that we need to, and reminding people that when things do happen, or we make a mistake and we miss something, that it's a good reminder to say to everybody, oh, you missed it, but why did you miss it, and what do we do to make sure we don't miss it again?
And just out of interest, do you have any, I suppose, specific instances where that has happened, where you maybe changed policy, or where you've been able to implement something as a result of kind of something you've caught through the use of reality capture?
I'm just trying to think. Yeah, we haven't changed the policy per se. It's allowed us to be a little bit more vigilant about the procedures that they were meant to be following, and whether those procedures were actually suitable to be followed, because sometimes they were not. They were easily missed, and why were they easily missed? Because they might not have seen the sign that was there, or they didn't obey the particular instruction because it was hidden away behind a bush or something. And it allows us to critically observe the process of what they're meant to be doing from an independent view and say, is this control or is this aspect working again? And if not, then how do we make it work? Do we change the way we think? Because obviously it's not, we can see these things are happening and people are bypassing the rule for whatever reason. Why is it they're bypassing the rule, and how come they're doing it? Is it intentional, or is it because they don't, most people will do the rule because they know it's required, but if they don't know it's required, or they find that it's laborious to do, then that's when you're going to get people to skip it. So it allows you to objectively view the situation, particularly when an incident happens. You can get rather than in the old days, you would go around, you'd interview everybody and say what happened, and et cetera, and you'd get a story here and a story there, and somebody that has to put their investigator hat on and try and digest it all. Whereby here you've got something that actually can provide a completely different independent perspective of something, and that's probably the I suppose the best use of what we've been able to use it for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, great. And then you've had our particular system in for a couple of years now, and it seems like you've broken the back of shifting that mindset. I just checked the poll there. Everyone who answered said yes, they've absolutely seen that shift in mindset, which is great. But specifically then for you and your teams, what does that look like going forward? What does it look like on, is it something that you'd implement at all sites, or is it, are you still doing that kind of slow rollout?
Yeah, we are doing it at most sites, and I think the best way I can describe its suitability is more of a static site. When you've got sites that are mobile, in the sense that they are linear projects, it's going to be difficult because that particular thing is moving all the time. So it might not necessarily warrant having that location all the time. So you're going to move the camera regularly. Now that's okay, but somebody's going to have to own it and move it and manage it. Whereby remember that this is trying to say this is inobtrusive. It's not there to add extra workload to you. So static sites, particularly where you have a tenure that's fairly long in duration, 6 months plus, warrants that sort of type of arrangement. Anything less than that, you might say it's probably not going to be worth the hassle unless I can just pick it up and move it and away I go. And you've got the hardware, but most of the times it warrants something that's longer. And I think for us, a minimum of 3 cameras per location is probably good, because then you get a triangulation sort of type of view. Yep. But again, a lot of that depends on where you can physically locate it from a safe point of view and from a operational point of view, because it can't go where might be optimal for the camera, but not optimal for everything else. So those types of things are constraints that we have to look at. But the more flexible it is, the more mobile it is. You can move it around and get that roughly for that. So three seems to be the magic number for us in a lot of cases. We also try to make sure that it's in a place where we currently use the current 4G, 5G technologies, but obviously if it's in a location where it's more remote, you have to make sure that we can apply the right telco to go with it. So if there's a satellite option like Starlink that can use as the modem, then great, and that will also allow us to position that in a location. But sometimes we've put it somewhere and that wireless signal just drops out, and you've gone, I need to move it 10 meters over here, and then it picks it up again, particularly in Australia, where in some of the more remote areas you start to get challenged by coverage. So those types of things are, I suppose, considerations in how we determine whether a project should have it. But yeah, up to 3, sometimes more, and we find that on linear projects it's not really great, because it just, you want it to be somewhere where there is activity happening, rather than something that is going to be dead for a few days, and it's a waste of a camera basically sitting there because it's filming nothing. So so that's probably I suppose the context of how we make a decision on where to deploy it, and how we decide to do it. And, I suppose it's not just the camera that's the thing to consider. It's all the mounting equipment, the solar charging, the network stuff. That's probably the complicated part of it. The camera part of it is actually the easy bit. It's it's all the hardware that goes with it to do it. So you can't really go, I'm going to pack this up and send it to a different site somewhere else. You could, but it's actually quite a hassle logistically to find a courier to put it onto and all those sort of things. So yeah, I think finding a good way to be able to recycle the cameras more locally as well is a really important aspect for it.
Brilliant. I'm going to open up to questions. We have a Q&A section on the left-hand side, or at the bottom, you can see a little question mark there. But just as people are throwing questions in at the moment, just a personal question for yourself, as someone who has this natural instinct for technology. You've worked with cameras in all shapes and forms. Where do you see the future of reality capture going forward?
Yeah, so I've been thinking about a bit more of this, and I think for me, there's probably a couple of areas that I think reality capture is going to get better. It's definitely going to happen, and its limitation is not insurmountable to do that. And I think what one thing is to integrate, to some extent it already does, integrates to some sort of 3D models that you currently do. So that can work, but we found it to be a little bit cumbersome at the moment to get a 3D model to link, because of the way the cameras might need to be moved, or they might need to statically change their position from time to time, and also that the angle that they're at just doesn't show you anything really productive. You're going to have multiple cameras to get a different perspective compared to 3D models. So that, I think, will improve as the cameras probably get more and more intelligent from that point of view. Another area might be proactive reporting, I think is how I described it. So for me, it would be where it would be able to tell you more than just who's come through the camera, but what's happened in a particular vision that day. So quantity information, has something changed from a dimensional point of view, and to be able to say, this is what has been occurring over the last X period of time that you could determine between here and here in this camera shot. And then also being able to aggregate that between multiple cameras on a site, because then they're talking to each other, and then be able to really develop any quantity-based surveillance around that would be also fantastic. There is GIS technologies that do that nowadays with surveyors and things like that. They can do that through drones or through other footage. So this is just an extension of adaptation and application of that. And I think then when you've got that being built in, you can argue that you'd build artificial intelligence into that to then be able to actually start to really give you reports and information that is easy to be able to transmit to boards or executives or senior people about what's been going on and what it can actually do, and it's all automated. So there isn't actually somebody looking at it, it's doing it itself and saying, oh, I've seen this develop from here to here, and that's been going on. And so really it's removing that daily report that some of the supervisors have to write up to actually know that it's being written up for them. It's not taking their job away from them. It's just saying that laborious activity that you remember you having to write up every day, here's a précis of what it's done. Check it, confirm with your notes, and then it's done. So you're actually taking a huge amount of workload off them. So it's that type of adaptation of being able to say to those on site that this is actually going to work on what you currently do today.
Yeah, no, funny enough, what we're working on at the moment is that AI piece, is the being able to do this object detection, this worker near another worker, or show us when there's a worker near a vehicle. My development team will kill me if I show you this now, because they'll be upset it's not entirely ready. But as you said, right, supplementary to their role, right? I think you said at the very start, this idea that it's not there to take over what you do, it's not there to replace you as and your working function, but to assist you with, instead of reviewing hours and hours worth of footage, show me where there might have been a worker very close to a telehandler, or a group of workers that might be together during this scheduled time as well. That's all stuff to come in the future that we can show, and I'm sure you'd be excited to run through it with us when we get there. I have a couple of questions come in. So the first one is from Celica, and it's how do you consciously design the rollout to ensure it didn't feel like a surveillance, but rather an empowering tool?
It was done very, very slowly, really slowly, frustratingly slowly, actually. So that was probably I wouldn't say that would be the best advice to do it, but it was actually fortuitous, because then people were comfortable with something standing there, and then they would go ask a question and stuff like that. And it wasn't actually switched on, and when it did get switched on, it was a lot of people were shown it and what it was doing and things like that. So there was a very, very slow progressive introduction to the crews on site, and they had the opportunity to ask questions around it, and I suppose it didn't come across as going, we're just whopping this up and we're looking at you. It was really like it was far enough away as well. I suppose I can't reiterate the point. It was so far away from the structure. I'm talking like a couple of 100 meters from what the structure was, because of where it had to be positioned, that it sort of looked like it was like a different project entirely. So in some cases, that's the progressive way we were able to introduce it. And when people realized what it was, they didn't worry about it when it was closer and got moved to a different location.
Yeah. Okay. That makes perfect sense. Just keep it really far, Slowly get it into their faces is your
Slowly,
recommendation.
slowly, yes.
Very, very slowly. Yeah. No, fair. But it sounds like that's worked, right? You've created that organic adoption. You said it to me the other day, just how people were then curious about it, right? Where before it was like, oh, that camera's over there, I don't need to worry about it. And then once one of their colleagues has it, it's like, oh, can I have access to this? Can I see what's going on? And you probably wouldn't have achieved that if you said everyone has to look at it all the time, right?
Yeah.
It's that slow organic.
The ironic thing is that I've seen them here in Australia. If you're building a house, just a normal house, so you're talking on a 400 square meter block, they've started putting construction cameras on these sites, mostly more for security reasons, but actually they are doing a similar function, and they are meters from the door. And so what I say to the people is, you walk around the street and see a neighbor building a house and stuff. It's also watching you as you walk past. Yeah. But also, if you were working on that site as a tradie, that you're an electrician on our site, and you're going to work on their site, you're going to see the same thing. And it's happening now in the suburbs, in your urban areas. It's not any different to what might be happening on a construction site here in West Australia or in the outstacks. It's not outback. It's not any different to that. So I think by society becoming more comfortable with it, actually is helping organically. The adoption of it is not as difficult.
Yeah, no, for sure. Our CEO Marco always says that every project is going to have a camera on it at some point, right? We're not too far from that. Whereas that would have been an outlandish thing to say maybe 10 years ago, that we'd have cameras on every single project. Exactly. A few more questions coming in, and one from Tom Donnelly here. Who do you think is the most open to reality capture on major sites? Is it the HSE function, management operations, or site teams, or somebody else?
Ironically, after they've used it, it's the sort of superintendents and supervisors and project manager levels. Those are the ones that do it. Safety guys only really like to do it from a respective point of view. They only want it from a reactive or record point of view. They're not necessarily there to see that. It's mostly the construction team, because they can actually see machines moving, what they're doing, where they are, and able to just ensure that what the sequence of work that's actually happening is in accordance with the plan. So that's what I found, is that the most eye-opening, I suppose, realizations was maybe not the most resistance to them, but the project team were like, yeah, I don't really care, I'm not going to use this. And then you sort of, so just here's your login, go and have a look. And then like, oh, okay. And then all of a sudden it's open on their desktop every day. They've got a separate screen specifically dedicated for the camera. And you go, oh, okay, I think you've adopted that, haven't you? Yeah. So it's that type of thing. And I've seen that realization come across and going, you know what, this is actually something I'm finding way more valuable than perhaps I would have bothered with. To say that if the camera disappeared tomorrow, they wouldn't not be able to do their job is wrong. They still would be fine. Yeah.
Absolutely.
But this just allows that extra dimension on being able to find that they can ask different types of questions and save themselves time, where before they might have had to drive down there or drop out the site and go and have a look at something. Now they don't need to. I suppose the risk that you could argue is that, does this make them more chained to their desks and they're less likely to interact with people? Potentially. Are they going to start throwing emails out going, here's a screenshot and, here's... Maybe. But if you've got a good project manager who understands people, understands how they work, how they think, they're not going to change their management methodology on their people work. That's not there. It's not there to do that. And if you've got a good project manager, they will not change their personality to do that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And now you just have a lot more people with 3 screens instead of 2, I presume, sitting at the desk.
Yeah, that's it.
Another question here is just from a client's perspective, does a contractor's robust reality capture capability now become a key differentiator, or even a requirement when you're selecting a project partner?
So I'm just trying to see what, maybe that's, I did the assumption that the contractor's providing.
I suppose it's a little different.
Is it referring to you as Evercam?
Yeah, so I suppose more if you have to work with a partner to get your work done, does them having good reality capture already in situ kind of sway your decision in working with them?
Well, I mean, if the contractor's providing it and we get access to it, no, that doesn't really. I mean, we might say you providing it and make sure we get access to it. That's fine.
Yeah.
But actually, most of the time is that this is the client's requirement. If the contractor wants their own, that's up to them. The reason I think is that we get a level of control over it. At the end of the day, it's the principal's site, it's the owner's site. They do what they want, and so if the contractor is providing that information as part of their suite of services, great. But it doesn't mean that they own the footage, if you know what I mean. The client is the owner ultimately, so they would do it. So so long as those principles are laid out, does it matter who they are? Not really, just so long as they've got some relative basic functions that we need to have, as in login, real time, ability to have individual access by external sources, so so we can get access various or whatever it might be to do that. So that's probably the shortest answer there.
Yeah, fair. And then Kyle, who you know well, has asked, what sets Evercam apart from other suppliers, given that you have used or may still use other time-lapse on your site?
Look, I think the ease of I suppose, conversations with you guys. It's not a hard thing to pick up the phone and get a system that we want, and we're familiar with it. So that's probably the main thing that I find easy to do. There are obviously maybe other suppliers out there that we can use, and I suppose maybe if I was to be objective, I would say maybe if I want a security system, I wouldn't potentially choose Evercam because it might not be the right definition or the particular location I want for that particular type of security system solution. But that doesn't say that from a construction management point of view that we would need to choose anybody else. At the end of the day, as I said to you, I think before, the costs of the system compared to what the cost of the construction project is negligible. There's no real differentiator. So if somebody says to you, I'm going to save you a few $1,000s a year on a license requirement, yeah, okay, great. But does that preclude me from changing platform and what I'm used to and various things like that? No, I mean, your service offering is pretty comprehensive, and we've always found that that meets what we want, and there wouldn't be any real necessity to jump around continuously, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then lastly, and I think I'll close out questions then, is just from your experience being an early adopter in kind of the reality capture space, what's the biggest competitive advantage that you've gained that a company just starting might struggle with to replicate?
That's a good question.
Maybe easy ones, at the end.
I know, and so funny enough, I don't think we're an early adopter. That's the funny thing. I don't think we are. Certainly not. Maybe in Australia, maybe, but I don't think we are. That's the funny thing. But that's semantics. The point is, I suppose, what do we find that is going to be beneficial for us against our competitors? Or from from a company that's probably starting today. I think if you start out with a mindset of having it, it's going to really benefit you from the day one of the project. If you've got embedded systems already and solutions, and a lot of companies do who are incumbents or things like that, their change management process takes quite a while. So I think a new company has a bit of a carte blanche of how do they want to set up their project management systems and how do they want this to actually integrate into their daily routine and work tasks a lot easier than an existing company that's in place. So, mining companies don't really compete with each other at a big macro level sort of thing. We do from a commodity point of view, but we don't. We don't on our work practices. It really comes down to cost per ton. So if we can make the project cheaper, ultimately that leads into a lower cost per ton of our product, then great. But you're talking very, very small changes here. So by us introducing a camera into our system doesn't necessarily have an immediate effect on our competitiveness or allow somebody else to be more competitive over us. What it does do is allow us to be safer, more efficient, and being able to learn from what's been going on it. So when we do the next job, we can actually see and record and get lessons learned from that process. So that's where the development comes from. It's not necessarily about what it can deliver on this project today. It's about what it can do and make sure that things for the next project are well set up and that we've got the right safety and the right systems to support
that. Great. Look, Mark, it's been brilliant as always chatting to you, and thanks everyone who's attended and asked questions. We'll be back again. In the meantime, you can find myself, Mark, and Evercam on LinkedIn and all socials. I won't share your socials just yet, Mark, but yeah, I'm sure people can find them. Any closing remarks from yourself?
No, it's been a pleasure, and I thank you for the opportunity to explain what we do. And I would have loved to have given some more examples of what we do, but working for a large company, we tend not to want to provide too many information sessions without a lot of updates. So the more informal conversation we have now is perfect, and it's been really great and a pleasure to be able to share those informations with you.
We'll get the nitty-gritty out of you at some point, maybe when you finished up with the rest. Look, thanks again, and we'll see you all soon. Cheers, Mark.